Dear learners, I welcome you to this class on regional instruments of human rights. In the regional instruments of human rights or the regional mechanism of human rights, we will discuss three important regional conventions or regional arrangements for the promotion and protection of human rights. And they include the European Convention of Human Rights, then the American Convention on Human Rights, and African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So we go like this. First of all, we'll be trying to introduce that what do you mean by regional instruments of human rights and what is their significance. After that, we will deal with the European Convention on Human Rights and all its aspects like features of the European Convention on Human Rights, impact and significance, preamble, significant articles, then implementation mechanism, optional protocols, and then we will try to conclude our discussion. We discussed in previous lectures that the United Nations has played an important role in universalizing human rights. Before the establishment of the United Nations, we discussed that in all the faith-based traditions, or you'll find in the Western liberal notions or the socialist notions of human rights that were there, but still you'll find there was nothing like an international consensus on a catalog of rights. So the credit should be given to the United Nations for coming up with the idea of universalizing human rights. It was already mentioned in the UN Charter that to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights is one of the purposes of the establishment of the United Nations, as you know. After that, we discussed that how UDHR, that is Universal Declaration of Human Rights, played an important role in universalizing the concept of human rights. The catalog of rights that was developed through the UDHR that became what we call the common standard of achievement for all people and all nations. So then International Bill of Rights, we talked about International Bill of Rights and other international instruments, how they inspired member states to promote human rights by including human rights provisions in their domestic laws. As international human rights protection must be sought in an interstate framework, regional instruments are one of the best mechanisms to enforce human rights. So we should remember that United Nations may be a supranational body, an international organization, but still we find that even the United Nations or other international organizations, they work or they operate in an interstate framework. And this is the reason that the member states are mainly responsible for enforcing the human rights that are being promoted by the United Nations through its charter and various other treaties, conventions, and declarations. So therefore, it is the state's responsibility to enforce or implement human rights. Under this kind of circumstances, when the states are coming voluntarily and developing a regional organization with a specific purpose of promoting human rights, then that must be appreciated. And this effort, you will find this effort of the nation states, that is the most effective way of implementing human rights anywhere in the world. The vital role played by the regional arrangements in promoting and protecting human rights was acknowledged and encouraged in the Vienna Conference on Human Rights 1993. It is not only this that, the organizations like European Human Rights Commission or European Human Rights Convention we are talking about, or the African Charter on Human Rights or the American Convention on Human Rights. Basically, you will find that their significance or their role in promoting and protecting human rights has been acknowledged and appreciated, encouraged through what we call the Vienna Declaration or Vienna Conference on Human Rights, and there was a Vienna Declaration also under which it was, stated that regional agreements, I quote, regional arrangements play a fundamental role in promoting and protecting human rights. They should reinforce universal human rights standards as contained international human rights instruments and their protection. You see, it was mentioned in the Vienna Declaration. So that first of all, what they have to do, that it was acknowledged that they are playing a important role in protecting human rights. At the same time, it was expected that they should reinforce human rights standards as contained in international human rights instruments and their protection. For example, the more than 100 treaties and the conventions and the covenants of the United Nations. Then the United Nations, encourages the regional arrangement of human rights protection and calls upon relevant UN bodies to assist and coordinate with these regional mechanisms. United Nations has not only given due recognition to these regional arrangements, but uh, it has also asked these international agencies that are operating within the United Nations or other bodies of the United Nations, especially relevant bodies that are dealing specifically with human rights, to assist and coordinate with these regional human rights organizations so that better protection of human rights can be achieved in the world. Besides the United Nations, besides the United Nations also inspired countries to develop regional mechanism for promoting and protecting human rights. The European Convention on Human Rights, 1950, the American Convention on Human Rights, which was established in 1969, and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, 1981, are the most effective and robust regional human rights mechanism. These three regional organizations that we are going to discuss this week, they are considered as most effective regional human rights organizations. Of course, European Convention is the most effective if you compare with all other conventions and the treaties of regional arrangements of human rights. These regional human rights mechanisms do not undermine but support the UN's global efforts to promote human rights. Again, it is important that the parallel when the parallel organizations are there. For example, you will find UN Human Rights Commission is there. Several other agencies of the United Nations, they are promoting human rights globally. At the same time, we are finding that there are many regional organizations. We will find these countries, for example, the countries of Europe or the countries of the Council of Europe, they are members of the United Nations as well. But they have also developed this kind of regional arrangement, or they are also member of this kind of organizations, like European Commission on Human Rights, or the European Convention they have already agreed upon. So, but we should remember that there is no conflict of interest. There is nothing like that. These organizations are undermining the efforts and the authority of the United Nations so far as the implementation or promotion of human rights are concerned. Rather, they supplement the UN's global effort to promote human rights. That we should remember. They are supplementing. Sometimes you'll find that it becomes difficult for the United Nations to develop consensus on many issues. But when the regional organizations, most of the time you'll find regional organizations when they are coming, they have some kind of common. The member states have some kind of commonality. It may be commonality of culture, ideology, or the values, and because of that, developing consensus also becomes easy. And at the same time, you'll find enforcement of these rights are easier. Why? Because the regional organizations, they can have more effective way of implementing human rights than we can find under the United Nations. The regional instruments of human rights also strike a balance between universalism and cultural relativism. This point is also very important to understand. We were discussing about the universalism versus cultural relativism, and we find that there are countries who say that all human rights are not universal. But they say there are certain human rights, there are many human rights, they should be understood in the context of the culture of different countries, different societies. So that is why all human rights cannot be universally applicable. And this is the reason that they have been talking about the culture specific rights, and they say that the cultural values should be also respected while implementing human rights through this kind of organizations like United Nations. You'll also find that the objection raised by the countries, especially the countries of the global south, some Asian power, some African countries, Latin American countries, what is their objection? That they say that in the name of universalism, that is through Universal Declaration of Human Rights or other arrangements or other instruments of human rights, they say it is Eurocentric view of human rights that is being imposed. And therefore, what do they want? They want that culture specific human rights should be also recognized. And that's why you cannot have one uniform policy for all the countries of the world so far as all human rights are concerned. There are many human rights they can be recognized as universal rights, but there are some other rights who can create many problems if they are being implemented in those countries. I already gave you example that there are many countries who have legitimized or legalized lesbian and gay marriages, whereas there are many countries who have already criminalized them. So, or there are some countries, if they have not criminalized, so they do not encourage lesbian and gay inclinations. Today, what is the problem that, or what is the issue? That LGBTQ rights, that is a contemporary debate on human rights. You'll find that the rights of sexual minorities is being emphasized. Under this kind of circumstances, implementation of this set of human rights, where you'll find that the rights of LGBTQ or the sexual minorities are emphasized, it creates problem for many countries, and that is why they are objecting. Under this kind of circumstances, what happens that the regional arrangements can develop a kind of consensus, and the cultural relativism and universalism debate that we are seeing, which is of course a great debate in the literature of human rights, then we can say that regional arrangements are best way to strike a balance between human rights and strike a balance between the claim of universalism and cultural relativism. So this week we will discuss the three regional human rights mechanism. So first of all, the three regional arrangements that we talked about, American, African, and the European. First of all, we are going to discuss the European Convention on Human Rights, that is ECHR. So in the introduction part, we have to remember that the idea of a regional arrangement for protecting human rights across Europe developed in the wake of the Second World War, which brought untold misery and destruction to humankind in general and to Europeans in particular. Since the Europe was the main theater of war. The countries, for example, France, UK, Germany, Italy, they all were fighting war in Europe, or Russia, if you see. So the main theater of war was Europe, so that is why the most of the destruction was also there. Of course, there is no doubt in it that it was Japan that faced nuclear attack, or the atomic attack, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, but you will find the destruction in Europe was massive. And so it brought destruction everywhere in Europe. So it was visualized to fulfill the promise of never again. This was something. Never again to what? To war or the Second World War like situation, and also the colossal damage that it brought to the Europeans. So that is why the people, the general sentiment in Europe was never again to the war like situation, or the situation that developed that brought the Second World War, and there was colossal violation of human rights everywhere in Europe. It was visualized to fulfill the promise of never again, an underlying spirit prevailing in Europe during and after World War II. So during the war itself, you will find when the war was going on, right from 1941-42 onward, you will find that the people in Europe, or the leaders of the world, they were already visualizing some kind of organizations that can stop war and that can also prevent destruction. So this was the time. During that time, there was already a discussion in Europe. A lot of discussions were going on, and after that, you'll find after the war, the pacifist sentiments were very high all over the world. So this was the reason that you see the never again spirit was instrumental in developing this regional mechanism of protection of human rights that is called the European Convention on Human Rights. The Congress of Europe, held in May 1948 in The Hague, was attended by 750 delegates comprising political leaders, activists, scholars, and others. Promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms dominated the discussion, and the idea of the ECHR began to take shape. So during this conference of Europe, during this Congress of Europe, what happened that leaders from the different parts of Europe, they were there, not only political leaders, but you'll find that the intellectuals, scholars, activists, they all were there. So that is why during the Congress, a lot of discussion was there on various issues confronting Europe, but human rights and in the fundamental freedom, they dominated the discussion. Most of the people were emphasizing human rights, protection of human rights, and promotion of fundamental freedoms, the core values of liberalism. On the other hand, another important development was the adoption of the UDHR by the United Nations on 10 December 1948 provided further impetus to the movement for a supranational European body to protect human rights. So, we have already discussed and we have focused on this point that UDHR, that is Universal Declaration of Human Rights, has inspired many countries of the world, first of all, to have human rights provisions in their own domestic laws. On the other hand, we also find that it has motivated many countries of the world to develop some kind of regional arrangement for the promotion and protection of human rights. So the Council of Europe was established on May 5, 1949 to uphold three basic values. So first of all, before we discuss about the European Convention on Human Rights, we should remember it was the Council of Europe, that adopted this convention. And what were the core values that brought the people together under Council of Europe? And what were the guiding principles for the working of the Council of Europe? So these were, the main purpose was to uphold three basic or core values. Number one, democracy. Number two, human rights. And number three, the rule of law. If you see these three core values, they are the cardinal principles of liberalism, liberal democratic thought. And on the other hand, you also find democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. They overlap so far as human rights are concerned. Means all these three things, that democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, they are interlinked. So that is why when we talk of legal justice, legal equality, legal liberty, all this we talk about. Then civil and political rights, they can be best enjoyed only in democracies. They cannot be enjoyed what we call in dictatorships or authoritarian regimes. Similarly, you will find that many human rights that we talk of, for example, right to vote, right to criticize the government, or right to contest elections according to one's own choice, it is not possible in hereditary monarchies or dictatorships. So that is why these core values they wanted to promote and uphold. These three core values are expressed in the ECHR, you'll find. So, these three core values, they formed, the Council of Europe. This was the guiding principle and the core values for the Council of Europe, but they'll find they were best expressed or manifested in the European Convention on Human Rights. The European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, popularly known as the European Convention on Human Rights, was adopted by the Council of Europe in 1950 and entered into force on 3rd September 1953. So again, you see different developments. First of all, we discuss about the World War Second. During the war and after the war, what was the situation? Why people were feeling uncomfortable, and how the pacifist sentiments, which were very high, that contributed to the rationalization of a demand for what we call the peaceful settlement of disputes, and also promoting global peace, also promoting human rights, protecting human rights. All these things were very much there. They were being demanded, they were being discussed everywhere. Because World War Second, if you see, we can say that it was the one of the most brutal violations of human rights in the world. So this was the reason that these things were being already talked about. So it was the World War Second that people wanted, especially in Europe, they were saying never again, never again. That was the slogan everywhere. So that is one thing. Secondly, we have found that United Nations had already, adopted UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was of course universal, and it was declared as the what we call common standard of achievement for all people and all nations. So that is why it also inspired. It had already happened in 1948. So from 1945 to 1948, and then you will find in 1950 what is happening. That in 1950, this convention, the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, that is popularly known as the European Convention of Human Rights, was adopted. So that was adopted on in 1950, and it came into force after the states, they ratified it. So it entered into force on 3rd September 1953. So all the three regional arrangements that we have discussed. So it is the first regional organization that was established, and this was established even when the United Nations had not adopted the International Bill of Rights. So International Bill of Rights was not there. But you will find UDHR was there. International Bill of Rights was completed only after the adoption of two legally binding covenants, that is International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and then the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. So the UDHR was there to aspire. The ECHR is one of the most successful and promising regional arrangements for promoting and protecting human rights. There is no doubt in it. If you see the implementation mechanism, if you see the respect for rights in Europe, and if you develop a parameter to judge the status or of human rights in the different parts of the world, then Europe is of course among the best region so far as the protection of human rights, rule of law, democracy, all these things are concerned. Europe is also, especially the Western Europe, or if you see, that is also the liberal zone of peace. After the Second World War, you will not find wars between the nations, although arch rivals are living over there. So it is also called liberal zone of peace, where the liberal democracies are living in peace and harmony with each other, and celebrating the spirit of peaceful coexistence. So that is why the European Convention on Human Rights is one of the most successful and promising regional arrangements for promoting and protecting human rights. The European Convention on Human Rights has a preamble and 59 articles delineating civil and political rights, mainly civil and political rights, and fundamental freedoms based on the Western liberal paradigm of human rights. So you'll find, if you see the catalog of rights in the European Convention, you will find most of the rights, they are basically derived from what we call the first generation human rights, or what we call the negative rights. So basically, they are representing the Western liberal paradigm of human rights, or Western liberal notion of human rights, where civil and political rights are emphasized more in comparison to other set of rights. The European Convention is the best manifestation of the recognition of liberal values and aspirations. This is also correct to say that the European Convention of Human Rights is the best manifestation of what we call recognition of liberal values and aspirations. What are liberal values? For example, you'll find democracy, representative government, political rights, civil rights, tolerance, freedom of expression, etc. So all these things you will find that they are reflected in the convention. So that is why it is considered as the manifestation of the recognition of liberal values and aspirations. The convention has 16 additional protocols as well. Not only the catalog of rights we are discussing, but you'll find that the 16 additional protocols. And these protocols have amended the convention from time to time or expanded the catalog of rights enshrined in the convention. So initially, something that was there in the European Convention earlier, it has been also expanded from time to time, according to time's needs and circumstances. So therefore, you'll find that the 16 additional protocols which have been added from time to time, first to 16 if you see, they have restructured the implementation mechanism. They have also widened or broadened the scope of rights. They have also expanded the catalog of rights that are there under the European Convention on Human Rights. These additional protocols make the European Convention on Human Rights a dynamic body, constantly evolving and addressing the needs and challenges of the time. Again, this is also important to remember that these additional protocols, what is happening, that it is not a dogmatic kind of document. It is a document that is constantly evolving. If you see the European Convention, what is happening, that the catalog of rights that is being expanded according to the needs of the time, and it is addressing the challenges that is faced by the people in Europe. So that is why it is a constantly evolving document. It is a constantly evolving human rights mechanism, and this is the reason that these additional protocols play a very important role in making it a body which is more dynamic, which is more flexible, and which is also addressing the challenges of the time. The European Convention on Human Rights initially had three implementation machinery that, of course, we will discuss in the next lecture. So far, we have discussed, you see, the background under which the regional arrangements of human rights should be understood, and we already highlighted that the United Nations itself has given significance, importance to these organizations, and it has also encouraged the states to develop this kind of regional mechanism so that the universal standard of human rights they can be enforced or with in an effective manner. At the same time, you'll find that these regional arrangements, they are not something we can say undermining the authority of the United Nations. Rather, they are supplementing the United Nations efforts to promote human rights globally. We also discussed that the cultural relativism and universalism debate. So that is why the regional mechanism can also strike a balance between what we call the aspirations of the people, those who believe in cultural relativism, and those people who are saying that rights are universal. So that is the best way to strike a balance between the cultural relativism and universalism. Uh, and we discussed that how the spirit of never again that developed after the Second World War, that was instrumental in giving a concrete shape to the European Convention of Human Rights. In the next lecture that we are going to have after this, we will be discussing the various provisions and other aspects of this European Convention on Human Rights. Thank you very much.